Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started while we're waiting for everyone to kind of arrive. I'm Elliot of TIG. This is another episode of TIG Talks, which is a podcast that is taped in front of a live virtual audience, which is you. And what we're going to do, as we always do, is take your questions raw and unfiltered. And the goal is to have you leave this episode or webinar, whichever way you're viewing it or listening to it, and be able to take things back into your business and do it. So it's all focused towards you and action. So, and Phil's already commenting on Ryan's
Yeah.
mustache, which is epic. Which is, I have to admit, which is pretty damn cool. So, a couple more weeks, man, you can actually get the handlebar curls going.
Especially coming from Phil, because Phil knows something. He knows a thing or two about mustache.
Yeah, he does. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Ryan, and tell everybody a little bit about Smoketown and what you do. But before that, I just want to make one very true compliment and comment, and that is I really feel like Ryan's one of the best brains in the business. I mean, I have, since the first time I met him, it was like a kindred spirit. I think he is brilliant. I think he has a unique approach to strategy. And I'm just, if no one else listens to it, this is still going to be a great conversation because I love riffing and talking about this stuff with you. So thanks for coming on, and I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
I appreciate that so much, Elliot. You know that I feel exactly the same. I'm super honored to be here. I'm excited to see that these TIG Talks have not only taken off, but they're about to sort of evolve into a whole new thing that's really exciting for you and exciting for the folks in the audience. So my name is Ryan Pintado-Vertner. For those of you who know me, and then for those of you who don't know me and are trying to figure out what is the story with the handlebar mustache, I have to start there, or else I think you guys will not be able to take me seriously for the next few minutes. And here's the story. So I have a 17-year-old daughter. She introduced me to making TikTok videos, and it all went downhill from there. I sort of went into a blur, woke back up, and I had a handlebar mustache, and it was a TikTok video. So I'll leave you with that little bit of tidbit. That's how I wind up looking as ridiculous as I do right now. So that's the story. Let me tell you a little bit more about me and about Smoketown. So Smoketown is a boutique consultancy that is built to help early stage brands and emerging brands across the natural products ecosystem reach their full potential, get stronger marketing ROI, and support their overall development as they scale and thrive. In particular, one of the things that we really focus on is empathy. We are all about understanding where the consumer is coming from. We're all about understanding where you as founders are coming from, where your retail partners are coming from, and we build marketing and sales strategy from there. So that is who we are in a nutshell. I'm happy to, I'm sure we're going to get into more of it, but that's the gist of it.
Yeah, and so we will dive in, and just a reminder, this is an opportunity for you to ask Ryan, both of us, questions, and to do that, best way is just to go ahead and put them into the Q&A, which is down at the bottom of the screen on the right-hand side. Q&A versus chat, please. It's just easier for us to manage. So I mentioned at the onset that we are kindred spirits, and the biggest place we align of many is around this concept of empathy. Empathy truly is a superpower, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I view it, and then I'll ask Ryan to do the same. But first of all, just to define it, there's a big difference between empathy and sympathy. So empathy is really the ability to see things through the eyes of those that you are in contact with. It's to be able to walk a mile in their shoes. It's to understand the motivations, the inherent fears, doubts, things that excite them, things that motivate them, all of that. And to have that understanding, to have that ability to view your consumers that in that manner is just so critical, because that's why consumers buy brands. They buy brands emotionally and emotively, and so it needs to be leveraged. And now, so more than ever, given where we are in the state of the world. And yes, Hector, I am proudly wearing my Tia Lapita shirt. So I would like it better if it would actually make me look thinner. So if you can figure that out for me, I'll wear it more often. So, but Ryan, share if you would, kind of your perspective on empathy, how it can be used, how you kind of try to leverage it with the brands that you work with.
Yeah, we think of it at two levels. The first level, and the most important one, is that we believe in building brands with purpose, and we believe in changing the world and leaving a better planet that's more just, more vibrant, more likely to support all of us in the future.
So you set the bar low. You set the bar low. No, grand dreams or thoughts. You just
zero. All we want to do is change the world.
That's it.
And the motivation for that is that we care about our brothers and sisters and neighbors and everyone around us. So that's actually where empathy for me starts most foundationally. But to make that more pragmatic, it's also just a fact that in the business of CPG, in the business of consumer brands, the bottom line is that we're solving problems for people. We have a way of talking about this, that anytime a consumer buys something, and this is not just consumer sort of theoretically, this is you, this is me, this is my 17-year-old, my 15-year-old. Anytime any of us buy something, we are hiring it to do a job for us. And we're probably 90-some% of the time, we're firing something else. We're either firing it forever or we're firing it just for that occasion. And what makes what we all do so difficult, the reason that it's stressful, the reason that you need a whole ecosystem of partners to help you build a brand, is that job description, the reason that someone has hired your product or fired your product, is not posted anywhere. Human beings are super complicated. We, say one thing and do another. We are not very articulate and even in touch with why we make decisions, because so much of it is subconscious. And so because the job to be done that our brands are doing for consumers is so difficult to figure out, the absolute most important thing that every brand builder has to get good at is empathizing with the consumer, because it's through the process of empathizing that you can start to deduce what is that job description and how do I nail
it. And first of all kidding aside, I do think that the majority of people on this, listening to this, have started their brands for exactly that reason. One is because they want to change the world, and two, because they're trying to solve a problem or fit an unmet need. And the better you understand that problem, the better you understand that unmet need from the lens or from the perspective of your consumer, the more effective you can be in helping them understand how you're solving it for them. Exactly. I'm going to put you on the spot here for a second, and that is, tell me about a brand, and you don't have to name the brand, but you're welcome to, that you feel is nailing it with their ability to empathically connect with their consumer.
Sure. There's actually quite a lot of brands in the audience right now who are getting it done. The one that I'll talk about, in part because I just spent a lot of time in a conversation with him, because we've got a podcast that featured him, is the Olipop team. So for those of you who don't know Olipop is a soda alternative that is, in addition to tasting exactly dead on like soda, it's high in fiber, low in sugar, incredible net carb profile. So they built a really fantastic business. And one of the things that David and his team have done, he and his co-founder and the balance of their team, one of the things that they've done is really over the course of the last couple of years get clear about what the job description is. And he will use that exact language himself. And what they sorted out was they actually are not really a health beverage. Of course, it's healthy. That is, it's got a ton of health attributes that are reasons that consumers wind up loving it and choosing it. But the most fundamental thing that it does is replace soda. And what that has meant for that brand impacts everything from the amount of time and energy that they invested in R&D to get the product to, in fact, taste like soda. It informs the way that they go to market. It informs where they're shelved. It informs the packaging design. In fact, if you look at the 1.0 version of Olipop and the current version of Olipop packaging design, the pivot was almost entirely informed by an intention to be more obviously a soda alternative. So not only have they nailed it sort of at the foundation of what that brand is about, I'd say there's another thing that they picked up on that's more subtle around like understanding, like really listening to their community and really leaning on their community managers who run their social media platforms to pick up on cues. About a month ago, as COVID-19, as it really became clear that the level of change we were all going to go through was enormous and that was really difficult for lots of people. Their Instagram feed, it was just like a single moment in their Instagram feed, but I remember it very well. They pivoted for a post from their typical look and feel and, benefit emphasis and lifestyle imagery. And they had a text-only sort of letter from the founders to their Instagram audience. And it says something to the effect of, holy shit, like this has been really hard for everybody. And, we're finding our feet, we're getting our balance, and we know that you're doing the same thing. And we just appreciate you. And it was a moment where they broke from their sort of traditional voice, recognized that the whole country is in a grieving process, that they themselves had even been thrown for a loop with how serious the shelter-in-place situation was going to change everyone's lives. And they just took a moment to acknowledge that. That's another very subtle way that I'd say that Olipop, that the Olipop team is really dialed in on empathy.
And I think that's a great example, and I think it's also a great lesson too. And that is vulnerability comes alongside of empathy, and it's 100%. Okay. It's okay as a brand to show it. In fact, I mean, I always think about it this way: we choose the people we hang out with because they're there with us for the good times, and they're there with us in the bad times. Mm-hmm. The relationship we have with many of our brands, especially the brands that mean the most in our lives, we want and expect the same thing. We want them to be with us when things are great and when things are bad. And so, you don't want to be outside of what seems to be, your brand personality. I mean, for example, if your brand is kind of, edgy and snarky, to be overly emotive and emotional and soft is going to potentially resonate as disingenuous. So, but if you are somebody that talks that way, it's absolutely fine to lean into it and understand it. So I'm gonna flip it around the other way, and in this case, probably best not to call out the brand name, but can you think of an example of a brand or a campaign or communication where empathy was completely absent?
Yeah, I can think of a few. And what I'll start with is, one of the things that we do at Smoketown is provide outsourced marketing leadership. So, if you're at a stage where you don't have a CMO and you need one, or you need an extended marketing team and you can't afford it, that's one of the things that we do. And as a result of that, sort of like my curse is that when I experience what a brand is up to, I like my empathy meter is dialed up because I'm sort of envisioning myself in that brand's shoes and sort of imagining how certain decisions got made. And I'll choose another Instagram example that, because I know so many early stage companies are leveraging Instagram as one of their, critical vehicles for one-to-one communication with consumers and for marketing. And this particular brand, I'll use the COVID-19 situation again. Nothing about their the story that they told had addressed and acknowledged how radically life had changed. So if the brand's vision or the brand's voice was about, I'm going to make this up so as not to, make it too clear who I'm talking about. Let's just say you're a brand that's all about backyard parties and, beach barbecues, and like that's your thing. That's where you show up. That's your space. Well, for obvious reasons, that's not really been a reality for the last 2 months. And not only has that not been a reality, it's actually it's a source of a certain amount of pain that's not available to us. And in this particular example, they just didn't find a way to reflect the moment at all. And the way that likely landed with their audiences, it just felt like the brand was out of touch with reality. And so that's a communication-based example of how not keeping track of what's happening in your consumers' lives and how they're likely interpreting and integrating what it is that you're saying and doing can just ultimately destroy brand value. And like that might feel a little tactical, and I can certainly come up with examples that are way more strategic and sophisticated than that one. But the reason it matters, the reason those small tactical things matter, is that for those of you who are founders in the audience who intend to exit at some point, like you're in this because you're building a brand that you are going to sell to a strategic or go public with in some number of years from now, there's a very important line item in the balance sheet and part of what you're building that's called goodwill, that is ultimately the brand's equity. It's the fact that your brand stands for something. It's got meaning and it's got value well beyond the line of widgets that you sell. Ultimately, the multiple is driven by the brand equity, and brand equity is built one communication at a time. So when you get disconnected from the consumer, when your empathy radar gets turned off, one of the implications of that from a valuation standpoint is you're not effectively building brand equity such that you can point to a brand some number of years from now that stands for something more than just the line of products that it sells. Yeah. And it winds up being a critical mistake that sort of accumulates with time.
And I would actually, I'm going to take it a bit further. I'm going to say that 95% of the reason anybody acquires a brand is because of the brand equity, because of the goodwill of the brand. Yeah. Because really, there are very few products that can't be replicated. There's very few things that can't be done by these bigger companies.
At this point,
it's
exactly
it's
right.
The brand. It's the brand and the tribe that your brand has collected and the relationship that the brand has built. And that's why so many of them struggle post acquisition, because that authenticity, that ability to have that real meaningful two-way empathic conversation with their consumers is lost in the corporate machine. So it's as important, the equity you're building in your brand, and it's really a hard thing to measure. By the way, there's no easy metric. You can look at things like aided and unaided awareness. You can look at your, by the way, don't measure it on how many followers you have. That's not relevant. It's how engaged those followers are and how meaningful you are to them and they are to you. And I'll give you a couple examples that just had come to my mind, and both from the travel industry, an industry that has been decimated by this. Mm-hmm. One was an email that I got saying, book now your trip to Europe, and it's a great time to book your travel. Totally tone deaf, right?
Yeah.
Totally tone deaf. if they wanted to do something, it could have been, let's support our other, world communities, and, book now and we'll guarantee it. And if you need to cancel it, you can, but let's send a signal that when the world opens up, something like that. It wasn't. It was just as if nothing had happened. Book now, discount. And then another came from the airline I fly a lot, and it basically said, hey, you've been a great loyal customer. Things are really tough right now, but we just wanted to let you know that since you can't be flying and you aren't flying, that we're going to hold your status for next year. Don't worry. We want you back when things open up again. And so,
Right.
that was just two different approaches. And,
Right.
a big part of, marketing in this moment of time, and you can totally disagree with me, Ryan, if you want to, but is it's not an opportunity. It's not necessarily the moment right now to transact in marketing, but it is a moment to stay top of mind. And if you can stay top of mind by saying, I get what you're going through. I'm here with you. I feel your pain. We're going to make this, we're going to get through it. That is a marketing win. So.
Right. One thing we've been writing a lot about and thinking a lot about with our clients right now is the importance of repeat and loyalty at a moment like this. Let's just take the use case of those of you in the audience who actually are lucky enough to have been in a category or in a situation or on an e-commerce platform where you saw an unprecedented amount of trial and growth. You didn't even have to do anything, from a marketing standpoint to get transactions. It sort of came to you. One of the things that really helps with repeat and loyalty, to this point that you just made, Elliot, is the authenticity and empathy with which you relate to new consumers, and with which you relate to even your loyal, like the consumers who are already loyal to you. Those small things, like the email that you got from your airline, those small things matter a lot. Even, I'll give you two more examples as you were talking occurred to me. One of them was a conversation that I had. Like we, like a lot of you, have been trying to figure out how to, manage our way through the financial hit, and as a family. And I was in a conversation with our mortgage company, and the woman that I talked with in customer service was so over the top concerned for me in a way that just couldn't have been faked. I mean, she was channeling some level of, like, some well of empathy for me, even though she'd never heard of me, that came through so authentically that I literally, no kidding, reconsidered whether or not I should refinance that mortgage, because I am so thankful to have a bank that has a staff person that could treat me with that level of kindness. So that's an example that occurs to me deep in the weeds of customer service, and what's the script that your customer service team or your community management team is working off of right now. Really, really detailed, nuanced choice to make. But I'll tell you what, like, that small choice deep in the details of running their customer service organization had a big impact on me. And then the second example that I'll give, because you mentioned travel, is Airbnb. And here what I'm going to link to is another part of what building empathetic brands, another critical element of that is when you build an empathetic brand, you cannot avoid, or you can't help but help other people in the midst of a really difficult situation. Like, your impulse as a brand is to want to do something to help address the pain that you see. And I personally have been incredibly impressed with the way that Airbnb has handled the COVID-19 crisis. The amount of money that they've set aside, some of it out of the founders' own pockets, to help make some of their Airbnb hosts whole. The way that they've embraced their sort of core mission and their core purpose around making it possible for you to feel welcome anywhere, or for you to feel like you belong anywhere. I feel like they really have been leaning into and living through that brand ethos right now. And my hunch is that, they're going to sustain a ton of economic damage at the end of this, but their community of hosts will be, many of them will be very, very grateful to them. And ultimately that'll be the key to helping that business, to helping that business make it through.
Yeah, great example. Okay, so we've now done a great job of talking very high level, very deep, very spiritual. I can see that we both, it's kind of ironic, we're talking about empathy. We both have singing bowls behind us. Yep.
Correct.
But let's take this ship to the real part, right? Let's just start talking about some practical things that the brands who are listening can be doing to understand, first of all, how empathetic are they? Because there's a lot of brands who I think believe they are and aspire to be, but how do you do a real check to see that that you're doing a good job of that it's not just your own narrative, that your consumers view you as a brand that gets them? What would you suggest to some of the brands listening to validate that?
Yeah, there's quite a few things that I recommend and that are all accessible too. The thing is that being empathetic is nothing more than being a good listener and paying attention. So
what'd you say?
To that, I said being oh, nice, well played.
Thank you.
You made me panic. You can't make jokes like that when we're on Zoom.
That's true. You freeze.
I was like, no. No. So one of the ways what you want to do is empower your brand and your team to be great at listening. There's a bunch of ways that you can listen. You can listen quite literally by, on a regular basis, reaching out to random consumers in your ecosystem, in your consumer base, and inviting them to have conversations with you. Maybe you have to incentivize them, maybe you don't. So that's one way to do it. A second way to do it is to read every single thing, or at least a large percentage of the things that consumers are saying when they send you emails, when they respond to your social media activity, when they post comments, reviews on your products, to make it a habit to read as large of a percentage of that as you can. Another way to listen is to, and here I'm borrowing a play from a few of the other brands that I've done, that I've talked with on our podcast. Another way to do that is to use Instagram as a source of polling, like put out the occasional, hey, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? Or, hey, comment on, your take on whether we should do this or do this other thing. So those opportunities to listen, all inbound communication, is your best ally in being empathetic. But then there's a second important step here, and this is one that hey, I'm a founder too, so I completely get how hard it is to do what I'm about to say. But you have to set aside enough time that you can make sense of what you're learning, of what you're hearing. To just take in a bunch of data, but never give yourself the time and space to actually sit and make sense of it is, it's almost, I don't want to go so far as to say it's not worth doing, because probably, listening in all respects is better than not, but listening and giving yourself the time and space to think and make sense of it is critical. So the question that we challenge our clients with, that I think you can just challenge yourself with, is what problems do I think my brand is solving in people's lives? And what you do is you push yourself week on week, month on month, to get to a more and more refined and nuanced understanding of what that is, not because you're guessing at it, but because you've increased the amount of listening and the number of inbound sources of communication and sort of intel from your consumer base, so that as you move forward, your ability to answer that question with bigger and bigger, with more and more confidence and with more and more sophistication, goes up.
Great answer. I mean, and I will say, empathy is a cornerstone of human-centered design. So, it's design thinking, which, came out of Silicon Valley, this concept of being able to quickly iterate, innovate, get product out there. The number one foundational block, the first step in that is empathy. And I would encourage anyone listening, a great resource is to go to Stanford's D School website.
Yeah.
And they have what they call the empathy hack or empathy blueprint, and you can download it. And a really good thing is to begin to build into part of your normal routine as a founder in your team, this concept of doing empathy interviews. So a little bit more difficult right now as the world is somewhat cloistered, but you can even do it on Zoom. But as you begin to have interaction with consumers, have this empathy script, this empathy interview script, which has a lot of questions that begin with why, or tell me what this means to you, or those type of things. And that what I just sent, and I'll put it in the show notes in terms of a link, but you can really learn so much about perception, about what your consumer is seeing or thinking or dealing with at the moment that they're making decisions. And the closer you can move that empathy interview to the point of decision, the more you're going to learn about the motivations behind that decision. So it's, understanding your consumers and being close to that and not being afraid to hear. And trust me, you're going to hear things that you don't want to hear, but that's okay. What about brands that are listening? So by the way, we've got a few questions, so I'll jump to them in a second, but brands that are listening right now that maybe recognize that they're being too just kind of one way in their communication, or they're focusing too much on just features and benefits or so forth. How do they begin to pivot to have an eye more towards empathy? When you have a brand new to Smoketown and you're trying to begin to help guide them towards having a more, empathetic relationship with their consumers, how do you start that process for them?
Yeah, great question. One of the simplest things that we do as an early exercise that anyone in the audience can do right now is to obsessively read the consumer reviews of every single one of your competitors. So, go to Amazon, read dozens of reviews across what you understand to be your competitive landscape. And the value of taking that kind of a step is it gets you out of it changes your orientation from I've built a brand of XYZ because it's solving a problem that I have, to I'm building a brand of XYZ that needs to solve problems better than what my competitors currently do. And so that is a treasure trove of data that is one of the first steps that we often take with teams when the team does not have a deep well of consumer feedback within the brand itself. So that's one thing. And then a second step is, I guess part of what your question is, well, if I'm a brand that doesn't have that many sources of dialogue with my consumer, how do I shift that? This is going to sound almost cliche, but the bottom line is the value of email marketing, having a consistent, reliable way to expand your email database, taking community management, comment responses on social media very, very seriously. Those things, I mean, frankly, they've been critical for a long time, but now it's just like the level of importance of having that in your toolbox couldn't be higher.
Yeah. I think those are great suggestions. I also love just starting at a high level, kind of really developing a true avatar of who your consumer is, you know,
Yeah.
and for you and for your entire team is being able to describe, put a name to that person and describe what their life is, you know, where they live, what they, you know, the kind of car that they drive, the stressors that they deal with, the things that excite them, the things that worry them, all of that kind of stuff to the best of your ability. And then just a good internal dialogue to always have is, you know, let's say that person is, you know, you name that avatar Ryan and you give him a kick-ass handlebar mustache. And then, you know, you just will always question your, you know, your communication, your on-package messaging, your marketing campaigns. You know, what would Ryan think? What would he think about this? Does this align with what he thinks? And it's just good to have that as a kind of guardrail. And so I would encourage everyone on this to develop that. And it feels weird at first. I mean, you should have a picture of that person. I mean, it should be in your mind's eye at all times. And then you want to continue to evolve that, because just like real people, your avatar, those things change, and both your brand changes and people's needs and wants and fears and you know, things that excite them adjust over time, and you need to do the same. So we got a question from Marco. Marco, great to have you on. How do you make time to absorb what you're learning when you know, he put it nicely, when business continually pushes you to go, you know? So I would just say shit is continually hitting the fan. You know, how do you slow down enough to build the discipline in to absorb this? I'll give you my thoughts after yours. You go first.
Okay. I first of all, like, that is the challenge, I would say. Like, everyone on this call is capable of doing what Elliot and I are doing. The question really is being able to set aside the time. And there's a couple of suggestions that I have. One of them, and there's a tool that we have that when I figure out how to multitask, I'll either post here, or Elliot, I'll have you circulate it afterwards. There's a very simple framework that we challenge our clients to work themselves through that takes, you know, at the most about an hour. So what we're describing does not have to be hours and hours and hours of time. It can be like, it just as a first start, it can be as straightforward as taking an hour to do this. So I will share that in a moment, or have Elliot send it around. The second thing, though, is to incorporate these steps, these empathy steps, into the decisions that you're already needing to make. So one approach, of course, is you set aside the time. Quite literally, you could set aside the time. The other way to do it is you simply fold these empathy exercises into your day-to-day decision making, so that so that your orientation is external, even when you're making fundamental choices. So, for example, as you're figuring out what your next round of email content is going to be from a marketing standpoint, the way to incorporate empathy is to take a moment and see, who is it that opened the last rounds of email? What do I know about them? And how does that inform me on the way that I should articulate, or like what I should focus on now? Or if you're thinking in terms of, revisiting packaging design, it's challenging yourself to ask 3 or 4 people before you write the creative brief for your agency, and get feedback on whether or not your current brand articulation nails it. So that would be another suggestion, to just fold those empathy steps into each of your discrete, as many of the 1,000 or so decisions that you're making on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and so I'm going to give you one very tactical one, and again, I'm using a bit of empathy. One of the challenges that we all face, and that I know that everyone on this call faces, is how the hell do I lift my head up to work on my business when I'm so busy working in it, right? There isn't a moment of time that is unspoken for that, that isn't being consumed. And when you do have that moment of time, it's usually needed for other aspects of your life. So one of the things that I would tell you to do is actually build in that time in your schedule, physically book time that is focused on, work on my business time. And one of those work on those business times should be really listening, kind of a listening tour, going through everything that you're seeing, feedback, both online, offline, and so forth. So that's just a tactical thing. Is you have to build that muscle, you have to build that discipline into your schedule. The second thing that I would do is going back to that avatar, and I use this regularly, is that I have that in front of me. I have that in a window on my computer that I can open as I think through communication that I'm about to send out, or I'm reading communication that I'm getting in. So use that to just make sure that you're putting that filter on, and using the empathy filter for both inflow and outflow. So I think that's what I would recommend on top of Ryan's suggestion. Jenny, I got your question around the Stanford link. I put that in the chat box, so it's here, and Ryan just sent out his link as well that he was referring to. And again, feel free, folks, just a reminder, you can put your questions in Q&A. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper right now in terms of the tactical stuff, Ryan. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that's changed, and I think the reality is consumer preference, consumer behavior has been shifted, mm-hmm. because the fact that you have an empathy lens in general, and as you apply that lens to your own clients, what are you seeing as changes that are going to stick that brands need to better react to?
Yeah, so much of this has been talked about on other webinars and in other sources. So, apologies if this starts to feel repetitive with what some of you already know. But I think the first principle is that changes that were already in progress have simply accelerated. So there was already a significant move toward e-commerce, and that's simply been cemented and has reached a new tipping point. Interest in focus on immunity-related benefits, the relationship between basically answering the question, how can I stay healthy and avoid getting sick, was already a big part of what many of you were benefiting from in terms of the increased focus and interest in wellness, and will continue, I would say, in particular, as long as it's clear that there's not an immediate solution to COVID-19 in terms of a vaccine or a cure. So those are a couple of things that are definitely meaningful shifts. I also think that there's some other things that I hope will stick, but I'm not yet completely sure will. I would say that one of the things that we've all learned, or that many of us have learned, is that there is a value in being able to work work from home and operate in a way that's flexible, and move in and out of today I'm going to work at the office, tomorrow I'm going to work from home, my kids need me to attend X, Y, and Z, so I'm going to flex today. I think there's a level of flexibility that's been introduced to our lifestyle that very well could stick. And if it sticks, here's the critical thing for those of us who are especially I'd say in the food and beverage space. Some of the things that were foundational trends could start to evolve a little bit. So for example, on-the-go snacking, grab and go, those things start to shift if folks are not on the go as much as they used to. So figuring out how to reframe. So if you're in a category like, granola bars or something that was super dependent on portability and mobility as the core of what of the job that you do, figuring out how to anticipate, well, what happens if people are less mobile, it becomes could become an important consideration. There's another piece to this that I think could become a shift that sticks, that it's a little too soon to tell around, which is the amount of energy that people invest in cooking cooking at home. That this is a once in a generation shift from food service to cooking at home. None of us are any less busy, so I'm not really convinced that it's going to. So I think that the pendulum will swing back pretty close to where it was. But another possible outcome is that people realize it's actually easier to prepare meals at home than I thought, or it's actually easier to pack my lunch and take it, with me than I realized. And so we may see some of the categories that benefit from meal preparation get a sustained bump, but that's one that I think is a little bit of a question mark until we get to the other side of this.
Yeah, there's a couple that I think one of them is uncertainty. So, I think that there are a lot of people who felt like life was somewhat certain or predictable, who have had the rug pulled out from underneath them and now are dealing with uncertainty. And so I think uncertainty is going to be something that is an accompaniment of our preferences and our buying. So understanding how uncertainty impacts consumer behavior is going to become, in my mind, a study worth studying. The other thing that I think is going to really change is discovery, how discovery takes place of new brands. So for a lot of reasons, from SKU proliferation and the burden and the pressure it's put on both distributors and retailers, to consumers, shopping more prescriptively and shopping less frequently and shopping more, to some of the reasons you said where, impulse and on the go is going to be potentially shifted and so forth. So if you're a brand that's dependent upon discovery, which every brand is, and a lot of that discovery was being done in more traditional means, you've got to start rethinking that now. You've got to start thinking about what other forms of discovery you can generate. And I wrote about this week because I really feel strongly that this is a kind of a tilt, and that is that we have talked forever and ever about channel strategy. And I really feel like that you have to look at it differently. You have to look at it like a consumer travels down a continuum of purchase, right? So there's all these different waypoints in which they have an opportunity to engage in brands and make purchase decisions. And that's in and out of various channels, e-com, brick and mortar, alternative channels, work, etc. And as a brand and as a marketer of a brand, you need to start thinking about what waypoint, which of those interactions or potential intersects are you best suited to transact discovery and trial. And that includes, what offers you the right connection with the right consumer, but which also works from a route to market and a capital efficiency, because you can't be reliant upon the old ways of discovery. And again, that comes from empathy, okay? And the reason I say that is that I think about it as I was standing in line, queued up to go into the grocery store with a mask, going through the store. The pleasure of treasure hunting in the store for really looking and exploring, that's gone. That's gone right now, and it probably will be for some foreseeable time. And I think retailers are going to reflect that and build out their perimeters more. So if that's the mindset, I'm thinking through the lens of consumers, then I need to figure out how I get found. And so, and e-com, for all the benefits of e-com, which is massive, and I'm a huge believer that too has been a seed change. When you look at, bricks meets clicks at 4 to 6% pre-COVID of groceries sold online. During this, it's 40, and now they're estimating somewhere between 20 and 25. Even if it settles at half of that, 20 to 25, it's a massive change. But driving trial, depending on the kind of product you are online, is difficult because the unit economics online require investment by the consumer at a higher level than they would in store. So that's one of the things where I think the lens of empathy can really play importantly.
Yeah.
So,
hey, Elliot, just to jump in on that, and I see Hector has a question that ties exactly to what we're talking about. There's when you can't try something yourself, the second most powerful motivator for trying it is that someone you know and trust says it's amazing. That was already true. It's not that that's like a new insight. It's just that that becomes now a more critical way to drive discovery. And there's a couple of things that there's a couple of implications to that, and I'll get sort of really tactical here again, because I think that's a great part of what Elliot has going with this show. One of the things that some of the most successful brands that I know, one of the things that they doubled down on was customer reviews. If they were an e-commerce business or digitally native, they hired an agency to actively manage their review process. They didn't take it for granted that they were going to have 4.5 stars on average across hundreds of users. They took ownership of that and drove it. That kind of a thing, I would envision a world in which, and there were already experiments happening with this at Walmart and some other channels that never did get scale. But imagine a world in which, as you're walking down the grocery store, you can see how many stars a given brand got from a user review standpoint, right there in the store. Or you can, hit a button or scan a QR code, and it takes you to an actual review of that product that you can listen to a review. I think that we're going to get to a place where influencers, and I don't mean influencers in you pay them $5,000 and they'll rep your product. I mean people who genuinely think you're the shit. Like people who, like your Tia Lupita, Hector, who genuinely think what you've made is amazing. Finding ways to mobilize that, to scale that, to put that in front of people more often, I think that's where this is going to go.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I also would expand to Hector's specific question. In the age of COVID-19, how do you guys see brands connecting with consumers by sampling food? What would be your recommendation or approach if you had a food brand that has a polarizing ingredient that tastes awesome? How would you convert a shopper without them trying the product? So, one of the things this is where it's going to age me here. But one of the most powerful marketing tools for years was talk radio. And the reason why, it's no different than influencer, it's social proof. So social proof remains one of the most powerful. But, I believe that a lot of brands miss other social proof opportunities. Now, influencer marketing in the digital side is I think still effective. I would argue that micro influencers geo-targeted around specific areas may be more so. But there's also physical influencer opportunities. So for example, specifically Hector, using you, I think, finding a few restaurants, a few chefs that you could give product to, have them take it to their when things open up again. But even now they could be playing with it and talking about it, but can take the tortillas and be able to create some recipes that they can feed their consumers. But that's going to be social proof in a physical way. And there's so much celebrity chef following, there's so much awareness around that if you could find a few of those around key retailers that you're expanding or key markets, that could be a great way. And the same as if you're a wellness product, finding a yoga studio that has an influential instructor. It's a great way to tie things in. So having B2B capability, e-com enabled B2B capability, so you can target influencers that are physical locations to drive trial, I think is going to be a must. Taryn had a question. Is there a suggestion on how you can utilize the community who are themselves expressing their want to support small and or local businesses and leverage the entire topic of empathy. So that's an easy one for you, Ryan.
Yeah, the way I'm here, the way I'm hearing that is that I'm going to talk a little bit about the stages of grief. And I'm sorry, like this is going to sound heavy at first, but I promise, like the payoff is going to be practical. At a very real level, what's happening right now is the entire country is grieving. We've all lost something. Some of us have lost something very dear to us. Others have lost something like the neighborhood grocery store or like their favorite yoga studio. And as these losses accumulate and we work our way through the stages of grief, one of the powerful parts of that, or one of the things that we hunger for, is being able to do something about it, being able to actually be in action and impact someone else's life in a positive way, because we see all this suffering around us. It's an impulse. And so I think part of what you're getting at is that there's examples all over the country, including my town right outside of Chicago, that consumers are deeply motivated right now to rally around the little guy, like to rally around the small business that didn't get its PPP loan and is, on the cusp of going under, or to rally around the mom and pop that, was their go-to for pizza that, they're worried may not be there anymore. I would say that to the degree that you can authentically and in a what's the word? Like, you don't want to exploit the situation, but if you have an authentic way in which you are a local company with a true local following and a real story, there's absolutely pent up a need, like a deep emotional need right now amongst a significant percentage of the population to do something to help you survive, because that's a way of coping with the scale of loss that's kind of unprecedented in American history.
Yeah, and I think that's amen. and I also think, Taryn, it's just, being visible in your community and talking to your community is key. They want to rally around you. They need to rally around you for all the reasons Ryan just said. Got time for one last question, which actually, Philip, and this time it wasn't about your mustache. So Phil was talking about, kind of a counter to what we were saying about discovery, that he actually has this weird ingredient that no one's ever heard of, fonio, and they're rolling out nationally in Whole Foods, and people are buying it at a great pace. Maybe inspirational shopping isn't dead. It's not dead, so don't get me wrong at all. But I think it's also this is an important highlight, and that is, consumers will always eat story, right? They always will, and story and the compelling why behind your business is even more important. So discovery will happen at retail. It's not that I'm saying it's a binary, it does or it doesn't. I'm just saying it's going to get harder. And the stronger your why or point of differentiation, or your ability to cause people to look or think differently, the more likely you'll still be able to drive that discovery. But if you don't have a mechanism, or I'm just suggesting you don't rely completely on that going forward. And, for you, Phil, you have such a great culinary background with your co-founder that there's, continued opportunity there. But go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm actually going to play the bad cop on this one. I'm going to be the bad cop to your good cop, Elliot.
Good.
I think that discovery in store has fundamentally and potentially irrevocably, or at least for the next couple of years, it is radically more difficult because of all these small things, from the pressure that we're under to sort of like shop more quickly, because we're queued up outside, to, part of our mental space is chewed up with, am I 6 feet away from the person next to me? Can you touch something, decide you don't want it and put it back? Have I contaminated it? Have I contaminated myself? I think we're looking at months and months and months of that. And so I would challenge you, Phil, and then other folks on the call to do a couple of things. And this is going to feel painful and real. This is straight talk. you need to do really detailed analysis of your velocity levels every single week to have a data-based rationale for whether discovery has started to change for your business. If you're continuing to see velocity growth and velocity strength pre and post, like that matches pre-COVID levels, I reserve the right to be wrong. But I would go deep into the math to validate the assumption that inspiration hasn't been greatly curtailed. And then the second thing that I would do, there's a really important part of discovery that we actually somehow didn't get to until just now, which is your packaging design. Packaging design is the most, it's the highest ROI investment you will ever make. Even if you spend, a solid 5 figures on it, it's the most efficient spend you'll ever make, because 100% of the people who ever buy your product or consider it will see the packaging, which is not true for any other marketing vehicle you'll ever invest in. 100% of them will see it. And so in a time where discovery is more difficult, where inspiration in the aisle is more difficult to achieve, one of the things that you need to do is be extremely clear and telegraphic about what your product is, and specifically what problem it solves for people. How do they use it? Give them a way when they're 3 feet away from the shelf to figure that out in 7 or 8 seconds without having to touch the product. Now, that was always great advice from a packaging standpoint, but that winds up being critical now because people are less likely to grab something and consider it than they used to be. So that would be the other way that I push pretty hard on that question around what it takes to continue to be discovered, especially if you're an unusual product.
A couple last things, then we got to wrap up. But first of all, I'll say this: it's a good thing we do what we do, and that you and I aren't like homicide detectives. Because if that's you being a cop, you suck. We're screwed, man. I completely agree. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's going away, but I think it gets. First of all, I think discovery at retail was already very, very hard and very, very monetized and very capital inefficient. I just think it's just gotten far worse. And if it's your only vehicle for discovery, just put it bluntly, I think you're screwed long term. I think you really need to be building it beyond that. Okay, so Ryan, other than TikTok, where do people find you and learn more about you and connect with you?
Yeah, please don't find me on TikTok. It was a disaster. So let's see, the ways to find me. I shared our website, smoketownstrategy.com. There's a bunch of free stuff there. A second way to interact with us and just to kind of hear more of our thinking around what it takes to build great brands. We have a podcast called Brand New Blueprint. You can find it on all of your podcast channels, platforms. We have great conversations with folks at Olipop, with Bread Seriously, with Fourth and Heart, a whole host of brands. And then you can just shoot me a note. My email is ryan@smoketownstrategy.com, or you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. I'd love to continue the discussion. And Elliot, I really, really, truly appreciate you giving me a chance to hang out with your crew here. I greatly appreciate it.
No, man, it's my pleasure. Like I said, one of my favorite brains in the biz, and really anyone who has an opportunity to spend any time with Ryan will find that out very quickly if you haven't already discovered it just in listening to this. So thanks for joining. We should hit our singing bowls as we go out, but we won't. But appreciate everyone. And again, we'll have this information up on YouTube, as well as being part of the podcast that launches next week with its first 8 episodes or so. And then this will be one soon after. So thanks everyone for joining. Ryan, thanks, man. Talk to you soon. Have a good day.
Indeed.